Yeah, Alex, do you think that Mary, the example of Mary's room, begs the question?
Um, do I think Mary's room begs the question? I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that. Do you?
What do you mean you have to think about that? Just think about that and give an answer.
Tasteless.
Classic tasteless.
I could just give an answer, but I don't know what I think about it.
Um, well, do you think that Mary's room shows that what do you think Mary's room shows? Let me ask that, I guess.
It's been a while since I thought about it, but I suppose it's supposed to show you that there's more, that there's knowledge that outstrips propositional knowledge. She can know everything, all the propositional knowledge about, but she doesn't know what it's like to experience red. But that is something that you could come to know. I mean, I'm not seeing why that counts as begging the question somehow. Maybe I'm not getting
I think that
it's begging the question because you said if she knew all the you said, because Mary's room says she knows all of the physical facts, but she doesn't know what the color red looks like. That's begging the question.
What I don't understand.
She knows all the physical facts. A physicalist should know what the red looks like.
You're cutting out, Godless.
everyone's cutting out for me, even Alex.
Oh, sorry. Am I okay now?
It's fine.
Because you're saying she knows all the physical facts, but she does not know what the color red looks like. That's begging the.
Well, she doesn't. She's never experienced red before, right? It's not begging the question to say that much, presumably.
I think it's begging the question that physicalism is false.
Look, if physicalism is true and she knows all the physical facts, then she knows what red looks like.
Yeah, well, so it's difficult for the physicalist to explain what happens to Mary when she leaves the room. That's the whole point of the thought experiment, because
look, she's already gonna know what the color red looks like before she leaves the room if she knows all the physical.
Yeah, but intuitively she's having an experience she's never had before, and she now knows what that experience is, right? It's like that there's something that it's like to experience red, and now she knows what that thing is like, and that's exactly the thing that doesn't want to, but it just feels like that's intuitively what's going on.
Well, I'm not a physicalist, but the physicalist should just say, look, it's counterintuitive to you. I don't care. You're begging the question.
Well, I don't understand this terminology, but begging the question, what do you mean by that?
Because when you say that she knows all the physical facts, but she does not know what the color red looks like, that's assuming that the color red is something.
Right. It's assuming that the color red is not in the physical fact.
And so what's in dispute is whether or not what knowing what red is like to experience is a fact, a non-physical fact or something.
Right.
I mean, I don't think the example begs the question. I think that what the example does is a thought experiment that's designed to, it's like an intuition pump or something, right? It's not an argument, so I don't think that it can beg the question.
Right.
It's just right?
We're using begging the question like colloquially. It's just presuming.
Yeah. I think that's what's throwing me off. It's just a thing where it's a story you tell, and the natural reaction to that story is to say, after hearing it, that, oh yeah, she does know something new, right? And it's to count against the physicalist.
Supposed to be. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Isn't it just supposed to be a counterexample to the claim? that she knows all the propositions entails that she knows the experience.
It's a counterexample to the physicalist claim, which is effectively that there's just physical facts to know.
Yeah, now, somebody would say that, if somebody says, if you know all the physical facts, it just follows that you would know what it's like to be read.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that's the issue.
Well,
Right, so
there's
they would
another
say
issue.
that-
There's another way of putting it.
I don't think that follows. It doesn't follow. It doesn't follow because the proposition Mary knows what color the color red looks like. That presumably is grounded by some physical facts, so she could know that what would ground the truth of that would be something that's actually false, right? So her brain, let's say what the color red, some sort of token identity to some brain state, and Mary knows that. Well, if that's true, and Mary doesn't have that brain state, then it follows that Mary doesn't know what the color red looks like, and Mary knows that Mary doesn't know what the color red looks like.
I didn't understand that.
I'm not sure that experiences count as knowledge.
That was stupid.
No, I don't. I think,
What do you mean?
well, knowledge has to be justified true belief. Doesn't
Listen,
belief have to be?
listen.
Oh no! You don't.
Well,
No, you don't
listen,
just
you
get to
have a
interrupt like that. I
Hey,
was
hey,
just
tasteless,
explaining.
tasteless. Let Orson go.
Yeah.
So, knowledge is, as we understand it, justified true belief. I think belief has to be propositional in nature, and experiences don't seem to be propositional.
You're wrong.
Well, that's one of the problems with omniscience, right? Is propositional states. That's why there can't be an omnipotent God, because
I
he
think
has
that-
propositional states.
I think that the problem with you guys is that you think that it needs to be justified, like justification is like some sort of standard that must be achieved for everyone else, for everyone.
Yeah.
Let's say.
Yeah,
That is not
that's
the
what.
fact. No,
Yeah, we do
no,
think that.
Brenda,
We do. We do.
Let me tell you why. Because whenever you experience things and you claim to know some things, you might be wrong about what you claim to know. Let me tell you, even though if you have reasons, even though you might have reasons, you can be wrong. Now, is it not going to be knowledge? No, it's going to be knowledge as long as you think, you have reasons to believe that something is true.
No.
Right?
No,
So the idea-
that's not good
No,
enough.
Brenda.
That's not
So
good enough.
Brenda, who is the judge to claim whether something is justified or?
Well, if I have reasons, that's not good enough for something to constitute knowledge.
What do you mean?
I have to have reasons, and they have to be true.
Yeah, it is. If you have reasons, Brenda, they're going to be true for you. That's the problem that you don't get.
That's
Claiming
not-
knowledge. Knowledge
that's
is not a
not
universal
true.
claim. Listen, Brenda.
Yes, it is.
No,
yes,
it is not.
It is.
It is not.
Yeah, it is.
Not, Brenda.
Yeah.
How can
it really
listen,
is?
If you don't have access to truth, Brenda, how can you claim, one, that knowledge needs to be formed by truth? That's first of all, and second of all, who get the call about whether something is true?
I think you are both
So
using
now-
two different definitions of.
Now
I
is
think
it
you
now
guys
is it
are
just me?
misunderstanding what
Wait,
the
tasteless,
process of
sorry.
acquiring knowledge means. So if you have knowledge, that means something you came about that you think it is true, that you have reasons to believe, and they are rational, and your conclusion is based on a series of reasons that lead you to a certain conclusion. That is knowledge for you. Now you might be wrong, or you might be right about that. Right? That's why we have the scientific method, because the scientific method
no.
gets us
What
closer
the fuck?
to a level
Okay.
of confidence whether what we believe is true or
You're
not.
just talking
I think we
about-
should
When
just
it comes
say
to
okay to this.
philosophy and this
Okay, so I want to say
method-
something really
methods
quick.
of achieving truth, it
Okay,
is
tasteless.
all
Okay.
Wow.
Okay. So now is it
That was a
just
mental
me?
ejaculation.
Now, I mean, I was actually talking about the failings of ordinary language philosophy a few days ago. But it's funny because I'll switch sides really quickly here. And is it just me, or does it seem like Mary's room thought experiment just reeks of a Wittgensteinian word?
I think I don't read of that problem, but I think I understand what you're saying, and yeah, it does seem like it might be a word problem.
Yeah, I think that the Mary's room. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think that all problems in philosophy are reducible to word problems, but I think the Mary's. I mean, it just came to me right now. This isn't something I've thought about until just now. But I mean, does anybody else have that into? Maybe the Mary's room thing is just like a Wittgensteinian word.
Well, it hinges on a number of different concepts over which people have disputed definitions for, like qualia, and what it means to know whether or not Mary experiencing red constitutes knowledge, things like that.
Yeah,
what qualia actually means, what is that, what does that mean, things like that, and people dispute those notions.
Okay.
And
Brenda, sure. So, do you agree that
it's a word problem?
Yeah.
It might be. It might be something of a scientific problem.
Why would it be a scientific problem? What empirical facts?
Maybe there's a point at which, when we can give a full physicalist account of perception and consciousness, that we would find that there's no longer a problem.
Well, assuming physicalism, yeah.
I mean, yeah, well, that's why I hesitate to say it's just a word problem. I mean, it could turn out that once we have enough knowledge about consciousness and how conscious experiences are constituted or constructed in the mind, that maybe we'll look back at that future time and say, huh, well, that's how we got it wrong. I mean, that's possible.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just here running my errands before I go to my grandparents' place, and yeah, just half listening to this conversation, I just kind of was struck by that. I thought, this definitely does seem like one of these word problems Wittgenstein was talking about, more than a true philosophical debate or problem.
Well, it certainly is a philosophical problem, because depending on your presuppositions, you get different outcomes. Different presuppositions, different outcomes to the problem.
Well, I'm just thinking, when Brenda was answering, she said, "Oh, well, there's a dispute about definitions." That's the first words that came out of her mouth.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah, and so to me that just betrays the fact that it's probably just a word problem more than anything else.
Yeah, that's fine.
I just want to know why Alex Malpass is trying to fall asleep at 9:30. If you're trying to fall asleep at this time, you've got to be up at like 5.
It's been a long day.
Are you up early?
No, not really.
Huh. I tried to get up early. I've recently been waking up at 5:30. It's been great. Alex, so I'm new to everything in like this terminology of all these concepts, like subjective logic and stuff like that. Would you recommend something for me to watch now that I've started with your Logic 101 with Helena?
And what sort of thing do you mean?
Well, I don't know what would be a good thing to learn next. So I feel like you've helped me understand propositional logic and truth tables. What should I learn next?
I mean, what? Well, what type of logic. I mean, want to learn why do you want to learn? I mean, why are you interested in the first place?
Well, I'm like personally, I'm a systematic and analytical person, and understanding these rules as notation almost is helps me understand arguments as people portray them, and you know, many other benefits I could probably reel off. I mean,
it. Having a reasonably good understanding of propositional logic is quite helpful for forming arguments, I think, and for breaking them into pieces. First order logic is pretty good if you want to have the ability to form more sophisticated arguments, types of ones that professional philosophers use. If you can do first order logic, you can pretty much read all but the most technical philosophy. And I mean, if you like that type of stuff, the modal logic is worth looking at as well. On the other hand, if you felt that propositional logic helped you, and you want to do something that's like that, but that you could get a job doing, then you should look at computer programming, because it's basically the same thing, and not worry about first order logic or modal logic, because whilst those things are good if you want to read professional philosophical papers, they're not very good for anything else. Whereas programming would be, if you just like that type of thing generally, and you don't want to be a professional philosopher, then you probably enjoy being a programmer, I think. So
yeah, I may well enjoy being a programmer, but I think the propositional logic, like when I learned about that is aiding in inquiry in general. So that's my main goal, is to like seek truth and understand and communicate with people better.
Yeah, so then in which case I think probably just, well, I don't know you at all, but like how much
Sorry,
how much philosophy have you engaged with?
well, I've read very, very, very little.
Yeah, so instead of trying to do more logic, I would probably get a wider grasp of other philosophical issues more generally. If you're interested in inquiry and understanding and seeking truth or whatever, then I would, yeah, I mean, it's difficult to pick a starting point in philosophy.
Alex, Orson thinks he's a global skeptic.
He's not. He's more than just a global skeptic. He doesn't have any beliefs at all.
Can I briefly butt in and say one of the first people I talked to about this belief system was Malpass?
Really?
Yeah, there's a YouTube video of it.
Really?
And
Okay.
what did you take away from that discussion?
Who are you talking to? Who are you asking?
You.
It's really hard to recall, to be honest.
Why do you think you're a global skeptic, Orson?
I would say I presuppose the idea of like we might be wrong, so being fallible. That'd be the most succinct way I think I could describe it.
I don't think that means you're a global skeptic. That seems like a very reasonable thing to say. Right?
Yeah, you're just saying that, hey, we could be wrong about stuff. That's not global skepticism.
Yeah, I think everybody agrees you could be wrong about stuff.
Well, could we be wrong about something that's properly based?
You're talking about fallibilism. I think is a more appropriate word than global skepticism.
So could we be wrong about our sense perceptions?
Yeah. I mean, I think in a sense, almost anything is conceivable, right? There's almost nothing is utterly inconceivable. You're left with very little you can take something to be properly basic, and still say that it's possible that you're wrong about it, right? All you're saying is that you believe, if something's properly basic, you're just saying, I believe this thing, I'm within my epistemic rights to do so, but it's not based on anything more foundational than that. It doesn't come with any supporting more foundational beliefs below that. But
Okay.
that on its own doesn't mean that you couldn't be wrong about it. It's just saying it isn't held up by anything else, right?
Then how would you defend against an attack from somebody like running a tag on you, saying that you have no like true justification? All your axioms are just axioms. You know, there's no
Why would
justification.
that be a charge? That's what an axiom is.
Well, they would claim that they have access to ultimate knowledge, and that is a foundation for them.
Yeah, people do that.
Right. So
Well-
how would you? So you wouldn't defend against an attack saying you know nothing. You have no real justification. All your justification like falls flat.
No, look, I mean, the central, the kind of mistake, I think, with one of the versions of tag, this version you seem to be suggesting, is that it's saying it's like a Cartesian criterion for knowledge, right? That unless your knowledge is based on something that couldn't be wrong, right? Then unless it had that, utterly immovable foundation stone, then it's worth nothing at all, right? But that's just what I mean. That's the thing I don't hold to, right? I don't think that's true. I think that even if I think that you can have a kind of graded level of assurance about certain propositions, even though they don't go all the way up to 100%, right? So even just because I don't have that, just because I don't think there is really that kind of utterly immovable fixed point, that doesn't mean that I can't be more sure that when I drop some object that it's going to fall to the floor than I am that if I drop it, it's going to hit the ceiling, right? The justification I have, I think, expecting it to land on the floor is not 100%, but it's pretty good, right? And my knowledge extends only that far. And so when I say I know that, I just mean, within that bounds of that's what it means to say that you know something, is that you're very confident about it and your justification is good. It doesn't mean that you're utterly certain about it and you couldn't possibly be wrong. So it's just a mistake to say that because I don't have that fixed point immovability aspect to knowledge, that just because knowledge isn't certainty, right? You're saying unless knowledge is certainty, it's not worth anything, but that's just wrong. I mean, that claim is false. And
Wait.
response to it is to just say, look, knowledge isn't like that, right? Knowledge operates in cohabitation with uncertainty, right? Not my problem if you don't understand that.
But so I don't know if I want to try and grapple this with you, because I will probably make mistakes that will just throw the topic off due to my inexperience. But let me try, I guess. So I think when you talk about you can have justification of believing that the stone is more likely to fall to the floor due to
Mhm.
I think that is based on a bunch of presuppositions which would be rejected by somebody who rejects your standard foundationally. So as you say that your claim, I can't, I'd struggle to repeat you exactly, but you said that knowledge does not need an unmovable source.
Mhm.
I think somebody could just outright reject that, and you'd have no way of convincing them that it's the case that knowledge does not need a movable source.
Okay, so we could just say there's two definitions in play, right? And they're different from each other. And if you want to call what you think is knowledge, which is that being completely and irrevocably certain about something, you call that knowledge if you want. I don't think that in that case, I don't think there is anything called knowledge, right? But that doesn't mean I'm a skeptic or I'm, lost in some kind of world with no foundation or anything. because there's this other concept, let's call it schmolage for the sake of it. But schmolage actually is the concept that everybody uses every day for all of the things that they talk about. Like it explains, you know, the assurance I have that the pen is going to hit the floor rather than the ceiling. I have schmolage that it's going to do that, right? All scientific endeavor is about schmolage. None of it's about knowledge. Like knowledge, I say, is just a kind of theological invention. Doesn't play any role in life at all. So I don't care if you can have it. So you can see, if you want, you can have knowledge and say, and you can, I'll admit that I don't have it, but only because, you know, we're talking about two definitions. And I'm just saying your definition is just useless. It doesn't matter. So what I'm talking about, if you want, we can call it schmolage instead, but that's the really useful thing. So it shouldn't matter that I don't have knowledge because I've got schmolage, and that's better. That's you know, that's the way of, that's how I see it.
So the problem for me is I can't say I would not even be able to get as far as I have schmolage, because I would have to presuppose I.
I don't know what you mean by presuppose.
So the I that we're referring to, like ourselves. So I would, all this is going to reduce to, I'll say it first and then I'll tell you what it reduces to in my opinion. So the I that we're referring to, in my problematic viewpoint, is not based on any sort of immovable foundation. Some people, I think, have argued that there is an immovable foundation, which is based in like experience, like cogito ergo sum. But I'm not so sure about that either. So I think that the I which I refer to has no immovable foundation, so I can't even get past that to get to schmolage. And I think that this conversation will unfortunately reduce to you saying that ultimate knowledge, like in a logical perspective, is not necessary, and I will just keep saying, well, I'm worried it is.
Okay, so it seems to me that the way that you're going about this is that you're trying to start at the bottom and build upon the foundation and move upwards, which I can understand why. Obviously, it's a kind of traditional way of looking at things, but so it's one thing that existentialist philosophers are really good at showing. Heidegger's really good for this, is explaining how the way that we kind of move through time, right, as we're individuals, sort of coming across ideas and contemplating them and whatever, right, your kind of journey through life, isn't foundational in the way that you were just describing. Right, you described, I think, if it's fair to say this anyway, you were going through this a kind of journey, but where you start at the most foundational point, and then you only build on things that have a sure starting point, right? But the other type of journey is where you start off being a body that's not conscious, right? Like a prenatal baby's body or whatever that doesn't have any experiences whatsoever. And then you're a child and you kind of have some experiences, but they're not as coherent as they are when you're an adult. And only when you become, you know, I don't know, teenager, 20 or something, when you're really starting to put philosophical concepts together, right? It's way after you've used language, way after you've had your first, you know, experiences of doing this, that, and the other. It's only at that point that you start really thinking about this concept of like the I and the self, and you're saying, well, I have to presuppose this, blah, blah, blah. But really, you've been operating without that concept as a philosophical concept this entire time. You didn't need it. You didn't have it at the beginning. You were there before. You know, this cluster, this sort of swirl of ideas and consciousness and sensations was going on without you having laid any firm conceptual foundations down about what it all means and what was happening, right? So you had schmolage all that time, right? You were dropping things and expecting them to hit the ground, blah, blah, blah. You didn't need to lay the rational foundations before you had schmolage, whatever, knowledge, right? You already had that concept beforehand. So telling me that you can't, you know, I'm not sure what the problem is. Like, you obviously do have knowledge anyway, even if you have a sort of weird you're finding it difficult to lay all the cards out in a perfectly logical order. Fine, fair enough. I mean, that's never going to go away, that feeling, right? It's always going to be difficult to do that. But the fact that you can't lay all the cards out in a logical order doesn't mean you don't have knowledge. You do anyway. You did before you even tried to lay the cards out, right? So you don't think that you have to lay everything out before you can have knowledge. That's just false, right?
I think that's quite elegantly put. But so sure, it would be logically false to say that I needed ultimate knowledge to go about my life as a teenager and a child. But what do you think? See, I feel terrible by even bringing this up. I feel like I'm not going to be productive now. But what do you think to last Tuesdayism or Wednesdayism?
Mm-hmm. What about it? What do you mean?
So, if last Wednesdayism, if the idea that we were created last week with all our memories intact, that would undermine the idea that I was using Schmollage all the time.
No, I mean there's two hypotheses on the table, right? One is that the universe didn't start last Tuesday with all our memories intact, and the other one is that it did, right? I mean, it seems to me that there's a choice between which one of those two things you think is. You're never going to know for sure which one of those two is right, because from your point of view, it would be the same, empirically speaking. It would seem the same either way around. But you just have to figure out, you have to just stick your finger in there and decide which one you think is more likely. And to me, it just seems a much simpler hypothesis that it didn't all just start. I mean, for one thing, think about the entropy or whatever. Like, it doesn't make much sense to think of the world starting with such high level of entropy, right? It just seems weird. Anyway, but I mean, like, there's loads of reasons why you might choose the denial of last Tuesdayism as a simpler hypothesis. So again, I don't need to be able to definitively rule it out, but I have good reasons, it seems to me, to discard it as a possibility. I mean, it's possible, but I just don't think that it's true, right? So I'm not really sure what the problem is with last Tuesdayism.
I was just pointing to if last Tuesdayism is true, then I wouldn't be able to rely on the fact that I've been using Schmollage all this time.
Yeah, well, but like I said, these claims are not meant to be. So when I said you've been using it, you've had Schmollage or whatever previously, that you've had an experience that's gone on, I don't know, 20 years or so prior to this conversation. I'm not making it. You shouldn't take me to be making a claim that's got Cartesian certainty to it. I think that it's true, right? Like I said, I think last Tuesdayism, there's reasons for thinking last Tuesdayism is false, right? So I'm not just picking one at random, but I don't know that it's false. So it could be that last Tuesdayism is true, in which case you didn't have Schmollage. I freely admit that. I don't think that much follows from that. Like, I mean, it doesn't help your case. Well, what you were doing was saying that unless you presuppose the I or whatever, unless you have a firm foundation on which to build everything else, you can't know anything, whatever. Last Tuesdayism doesn't help you in that conversation. It doesn't help your case, right?
I think it would help my case because all I would have is memories of using Schmollage, and the memories would not be accurate in that case. So if I never, because the point, I think you said Heidegger or someone said that if you were using, go ahead, sorry.
Heidegger. That's
Heidegger. Says I've been using Schmollage all my life, and it's been useful. Then only once I start to ponder it rationally, I come into a problem. But if last Tuesdayism is true, all my true existence would be in this problem, in this rational problem. The time of using Schmollage is fake. It's just a mirage.
But I mean, I'm not saying, look, if it doesn't have to be last Tuesday, of course, right? It could have been 1 microsecond ago, right? It might have been that you've never spoken at all. It's only ever been me that's speaking because the universe has only just begun. In which case, you've never voiced a single skeptical doubt at all. So that could be true, but that wouldn't mean that. And it doesn't, that possibility. So it seems to me that what's in dispute here is your claim was, unless you have this Cartesian certainty, you don't have any knowledge at all. And I was denying that, and I was saying you can have knowledge even without that type of Cartesian certainty. It just seems to me that the hypothesis of last Thursdayism doesn't help either of us. If it's true or false, it doesn't add anything to either of our positions. It's just off at an angle from what we're talking about. Am I still online?
Yeah, you are. Sorry, I do this.
It's okay.
I think I don't think I should like rebut at all. I think I should just think about what's been said and maybe read some of Heidegger.
Well, you might want to read
Not right away.
about Heidegger. Maybe I wouldn't recommend reading Heidegger directly. It's very difficult. But I think maybe an introduction to existentialism might be good.
Right. See, I think a lot of my problem stems from trying to be philosophical without actually reading any of the literature.
Well, it's fucking hard, right? Philosophy's fucking hard, and it's a lifelong thing. It's not. It doesn't. There's no goal with philosophy. There's no enlightenment or insight that you ever really get. You just realize more ways that you were wrong in the past. It's just like it's like when you're keeping your house clean, there's never really a goal. It's just dirt builds up if you don't do it, and if you don't want it to be dirty, you need to clean it. And that's what philosophy is like. It's just sort of finding out, getting rid of stuff that was wrong. But it's it's just, you should always, I don't know, it's like tuning an instrument or something. It's just something you have to keep doing all the time.
What do you think?
I had a
Go ahead,
question.
Ace.
So you mentioned that almost anything is conceivable. Doesn't that present a problem for most non-cognitivist positions?
You might have to join the dots for me. Why would that be a problem for non-cognitivist positions?
Well, I mean, I would think that conceiving and cognizing are very similar. I mean, maybe there's a distinction I'm not aware of.
Normally, non-cognitivism means that it's a kind of misleading word, but it means that so non-cognitivism is a position about an area of discourse, right? So if you're non-cognitivist about, say, morality, then you're saying about moral claims that they're not the sort of things that are true or false, right? So it's like a non-cognitivist would understand a sentence like, it's wrong to do X as not a claim about a factual.
So it's like non-interpretable. It's like non-interpretable.
No, interpretable, but as something other than a claim about how things are, right? So it could be that what that sentence, it's wrong to do X, means is something like, it's a noise that you make when you disapprove of people doing X, like saying boo when someone does something, right? Like, or putting a thumbs down or something, right? That type of expression isn't a claim, right? When you say boo to someone, like boo, if you're putting your thumbs down in a coliseum, it's not a claim about the way that things are. It's an expression of your opinion about it, right? And a non-cognitive
might be the case.
Be like that.
Yeah, I think you're talking more specifically about moral non-cognitivism. I was just talking about non-cognitivism generally.
Well, but non-cognitivism about any area would be to adopt that approach to whatever the area is we're talking about. So non-cognitivism about, say, scientific discourse would be to say that all scientists are doing is when they claim to verify a theory is just that they like what the theory says or something. Right? It would be weird to take that view for science, but non-cognitivism is the same general approach. It's to say that the claims of a certain discourse aren't expressing things that are true or false, that they're doing something else other than making claims. So I'm not seeing, other than
Yeah, okay, I definitely see the
word,
distinction now. Yeah, that makes sense.
But I mean, in general, it's lots of people say it's impossible to conceive of something or other, but most of the time that feels to me anyway like it's just wrong. I mean, so if someone says, so classically people say things like, oh, I just can't imagine what it would be like for a contradiction to be true, right? I just can't imagine what it would be like. But it's, I mean, in some senses you are, you've put a name to it, right? You know, what it would be like for a contradiction to be true would be P and not P would be true at the same time, right? In some sense, I've just imagined it. So, I mean, in that sense, in that very weak sense, everything is conceivable, right? Like, tell me something that's not conceivable, and I will have had to conceive it to even think about it as a candidate for something that's not conceivable. So it's, you know, in some senses, everything is conceivable, right?
So you would say that a color we haven't seen yet is conceivable?
Well, I mean, I feel like I've just done something, right? My brain did something that processed the words you were saying, and I kind of conceived something, right? It's not, obviously it's not as coherent as like remembering what I had for lunch today, but nobody said that all conceptions have to be equally coherent.
See, I would have thought that when I say when I say that imagine a color not on the color wheel, I think we would be more pointing to the fact that the color wheel is all there is for us, not that there is not conceiving what it's like to be off the color wheel.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly can't like conceive of a new color in the same way that I can conceive of the colors that I already know about, right? It's not like a missing slot I can just sort of activate in my brain that gives me what ultraviolet looks like or something. I don't know what it looks like because I can't see it. But I can kind of generally, I imagine the idea of having an experience that was utterly different to anything else I'd experienced before, because I've had experiences like that before. So, I mean, it would just be one of those things that happened that was different to all the other things that had come before it. I mean, and it would be, you know, it like the way that yellow is different to blue, right? They're not commensurable, the experiences. I can't, you know, blue isn't like yellow, right? It's a color. So in that sense, it's a bit like it, but it's, you know, other than being a color, they're completely different from each other.
That's very succinct. I just want to ask you about another one. Michael was in here once. Oh, I shouldn't have said his name. He was annoyed that I said his name last. Because I might be quoting him improperly, and he's much smarter than I am. He was annoyed that I misrepresented him. But so the idea is that he could conceive of nothingness. So again, I might misrepresent what he was saying, but imagine like no universe, no matter, no space. What would it mean to conceive that? I mean, you seem to have explained color to me quite well. I just don't understand this other one.
Well, it depends what you're asking for. I mean, like, I'm not saying I can give you an impression. I can't make your brain. I mean, if I did, it would be pure luck, I think. But I can't make you have a clear and distinct idea of what that is like. I don't think I was able to do that with the color thing either. I think I gave you a brief, very patchy glimpse of an outline of roughly what it might be like. But, you know, it's kind of, I don't know, you just sort of take all the things away from, you know, imagine this room but with nothing in it, and then no room around the outside and nothing beyond that either. I don't know, it's like you're left with just a sense that there's nothing there. I mean, why my question, I suppose, is why doesn't that sort of thing count as conceiving of it, right? I mean,
Because
does. I mean,
I would say that that would have failed, because when you say imagine a room with nothing in it and then remove the room and there's nothing external to the room, the problem is when we say no thing, I think we're talking about matter. And as far as I've watched on YouTube about space, there is something about space even with no matter present. So we'd have to be removing whatever that is. That I don't even know if we can conceive of that.
But so what I think what you're trying to do is like have a picture of the sensation in your mind. Like, what would it be like if I was there and there was nothing there and there wasn't even any space there? What would that be like? Well, you wouldn't have a sensation. There wouldn't be what it's like to experience the absence of space, even, right? It wouldn't be, you couldn't form an experience of that, right? Your eyes and ears and whatever, the way that information is taken in requires there to be space, right? So you couldn't actually have an experience, right? But to conceive of something isn't necessarily the same thing as to have a mental experience of what it would be like if that thing was true, right? That's not right. You couldn't have a mental experience if there was no space. But to conceive of there being no space is just to imagine that there is nothing at all there, right? There wouldn't be any experiences either, right? But you don't have to have an experience to conceive of it. You just describe it, right? It's just the absence of all the things that are there. That's it. The conception is kind of done at that point. I think most people want there to be an accompanying kind of picture that goes along with it, and they can't form a picture, and they say, "Oh, therefore I can't conceive of it." It just seems to me that's a kind of category mistake.
Just like I can't imagine a million-sided polygon, but I can conceive of it, right?
Yeah, you don't know what it would look like, but you can conceive of it because you could just go a polygon with a million sides. Who cares, right? That's easy to. I feel like if you can describe it and entertain it in that way, that it feels like a very loose sense of conceiving of something. So, and in that sense, everything is conceivable, right? And that's the sense in which, once that penny drops, I think, then, of course, I could conceive about me having false beliefs, right? In any sense, all my beliefs could be false, and I can conceive of it, right? It doesn't mean that I have to actually think that I have all false beliefs, but in some sense, I can conceive it because I just described it. It's obviously coherent that I have all false beliefs. So, in that sense, if you want a philosophy which has, such a level of certainty that there are things which are inconceivable of them being false, right, then that just seems off the table at the beginning, because I don't understand what it would mean for there to be something that I couldn't conceive of in that very loose sense.
So, I think I was trying to, when I was understanding the word conceive, I think I was using a wrong definition. I was thinking thinking of like the experience side. So I think there should be like three categories drawn. So as in there is like the logically possible, the experientially possible, and the conceivably possible.
Okay.
I don't really have much more to add to that.
And I think that's a good way of thinking about it. And I think what's conceivably possible is broader than any of the others.
Right.
I conceive of things which are logically impossible, right? Like a contradiction or something.
And you can conceive of things that are experientially impossible.
Yeah, sure. And it might be that a contradiction is experientially impossible, right?
It might be.
There are things that are logically possible, which are experientially impossible, like a million-sided polygon or something, right? I can't imagine what that looks like, but it's logically possible.
Do we should we try and give one of these categories more weight than the other?
Well, wait in what respect?
Should we believe that one of these categories points us to the truth more than the others too?
You just go to different modal domains, honestly.
I mean, I'm not sure. They're useful for different things. None of them is like reality rather than the other, I don't think.
The experiential possibility is probably just like nomological possibility, right?
It's really closely intertwined with. I think it's probably slightly narrower than that. I think there are things that are physically possible but are not experientially possible. Like, I mean, the inside of a sun or something, like it's.
Oh yeah, that's true.
You know,
or like subatomic activity or something like that.
Yeah. Or the speed of light or something like. So, but obviously, experience, the type of experience that we have is a phenomena that requires the physical universe to be configured in the way that it is for it to come about. So it's something that requires nomological.
I was going to extend it and say, what if you can imagine yourself in a different possible world, and somehow, you are identical, and you could have different experiences, so that what's experientially possible in that world is different, and hence include things that aren't possible in this actual world.
That just sounds like broad logical possibility.
That's confusing.
Well, I wouldn't say it's logically possible, because logical possibility is just there's no contradiction.
No, broad logical possibility is wider than narrow logical possibility.
And what's the difference?
A sufficient condition for narrow logical possibility is absence of logical inconsistency, and then broad logical possibility is just actualizability, instantiability, and that goes to like intuition pumps. You just go to what you would conceive to be possible in terms of instantiability, like my having an alligator body or something like that, or a prime.
Which one's broad and which one's narrow?
Minister. Broad is just having to do with what is actualizable, and that's pumped by intuition pumps. So, like the paradigm example I've read is the prime minister being a prime number. There's no logical inconsistency there, but it might not be able to be actualizable. That's what's talked about in like planning and thinking.
But why is it broad then? Because logical possibility is broader than it.
Like the sufficient condition for it to be broad is just that there's the absence of logical inconsistency and the fact that it can't be instantiable if a world were to be actualized in which that particular state of affairs were to exist, like the prime number being a prime minister. Like narrow logical possibility would be like a prime number not being a prime number or something like that. That's a straight up logical inconsistency. But then
the terminology like misleading, because there are possible worlds that are narrowly logically possible that are not broadly logically possible. But the terminology suggests that one is a set that contains the other in the other direction.
That's true.
Yeah.
It's real intuition driven. That's why I like when Craig uses these intuition pumps with like Hilbert's Hotel or something like that. It just goes to like clashes of intuition pumps. So some people like Graham Oppie might just say that, no, it's metaphysically possible. And he provides his own intuition pumps about, I don't know, people not leaving their room or something like that. And you only get the absurdities if they're able to move from room to room or something like that. But both Craig and Oppie would affirm that it's still narrowly logically possible to have Hilbert's Hotel or something like that, something along those lines.
Yeah. Craig thinks that it's metaphysically impossible or something.
Exactly, yeah. And that's synonymous with broad, yeah, exactly.
I thought it was metaphysically possible.
That's not the way they use the terminology, yeah. They think it's metaphysically impossible, but logically possible.
What's the difference?
I thought Craig was claiming that Hilbert's Hotel is
impossible.
Okay, yeah, impossible, yes, that's right, sorry.
In the broad sense. Broadly, logically impossible. Metaphysically impossible.
Yeah, he's saying it's metaphysically impossible.
Okay, The only analysis I can make sense of metaphysical possibility is simply its logical possibility within specified metaphysics. So to say it's metaphysically impossible is relative to saying that within this metaphysics it's logically impossible.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to have like a semantics to talk about modality. Yep.
The way of thinking about it, which is that there's only logical possibility, right? Because the other grades of possibility, so like if we take metaphysical possibility as an example, right? Then, well, I just take a less controversial one. If you take physical possibility and compare it to logical possibility, well, what the difference is just that with logical possibility, what the constraints are, the kind of the axioms and the parameters of the most broad logical system that you think is true, right? So let's say it's first order logic or something, and then physical possibility is just a bunch of axioms about what the laws of physics are, which you express in first order logic, right? So it's just a bunch more axioms. So all it is just, it's just a more detailed logical system, which specifies what can and can't take place. And so the difference between logical possibility and physical possibility is just, one of them is just a less detailed logical system than the other, right? But and that seems persuasive to me. It's hard to imagine that they're really, I'm not even sure what we mean when we talk about a type of possibility that isn't expressible as in terms of, that's just a more complicated logical system.
I have a question, just something occurred to me. So, there's a continuum hypothesis. I was wondering if, we've got these overlapping with these sets of broader and narrower possibilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there some sort of idea that, let's say it's something like this. So if you say, we're talking about logical possibility when I say possibly, right? So if you say possibly P, right?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, you say possibly P and the conjunction of set. Can you have like a continuum that is for between any, if you had, say, I don't know, possibly P, and then you had possibly P and Q, between any two like that, there is a third one such that one entails, there's a sort of entailment in the middle.
Yeah, so I think what you're saying is that like in between, so you might say that in between, so something you could have, it's physically possible that P and it's logically possible that P, right? Where it's being physically possible that P entails that it's logically possible, but not the other way around, right?
Yeah.
But you might ask the question, is there some grade of modality between them? And someone like Plantinga might say, yeah, or Craig would say, yeah, this is
right. But I'm generalizing for any, right? There's always a grade in between. It's like a continuum hypothesis. There's always a one in between.
Narrowly, maybe. I don't see the incoherency there.
Where it's densely ordered.
Yeah.
I don't know what that means.
Well, it densely ordered means that a set's densely ordered if there's a third one in between them.
Right. Oh, yeah. Sorry. I lost it. Yeah, okay. So, is that true then?
No. I don't see the motivation to I mean, I think there's...
Well, the motivation is just fooling around, basically. Because I just thought, you've got these sets. So you've got physically possible, entails, presumably, I'm not going to look for the controversy, it could be some, metaphysically possible, entails logically possible, not the other way. So I thought, you can model that as having, you can maybe, that doesn't matter, but you can model it as having more, you've got more propositions in the ones before, so you're narrowing down the possibilities. And then I just thought, well, what if you had one set and another set where you add some propositions? Is it always true that there's always a middle possibility?
Yeah, but I mean, so if you ask the question of like, I mean, it's very similar to the relationship between say, biology, physics, chemistry, right? So where something is biologically possible, then it's chemically possible, and if something's chemically possible, then it's physically possible or something, right? Like an organism relies on chemistry, which relies on the physics or something like that. And I mean, yeah, I mean, maybe there's an science in between biology and chemistry, I guess. Maybe it seems reasonable, but I mean, the idea that there's always going to be an intermediary science between any two sciences, I don't know, like how that, I mean, maybe, I don't know. And I guess you could always cook up a new modality if you wanted to, but I'm not sure that they really mean very much at that stage. Like, if it's not very useful for anything, because I don't think physical modality is a thing that exists independently of logical modality. It's just a description of something, right? If anything, there's got to be one type of, it's kind of monist about possibility. There's really one possibility, one modality, and the others are just like operations within that. Like I said, physical possibility is just logical possibility, like operated on a certain way. So I mean, yeah, I think you could probably do that endlessly if you wanted to, but I'm not sure that that means that much. I mean, I'm just saying you could gerrymander a type of metaphysical possibility that just included one extra proposition if you want to. But I don't think you've deduced the existence of a new type of modality by doing that. You've just gerrymandered in a new set, right?
It might just be epistemic, right?
Yeah, like you could say this is biology plus one electron in the system that makes it not quite biology, but slightly closer to chemistry or something, slightly further away from chemistry. The biology minus one electron in the description of what it thinks about the world, but it's not really a new science. I mean, I don't know. It feels like a strange conversation.
Yeah, if you were like a necessitarian and you only agreed to one kind of modality, then any kind of way you would slice up modality at the joints might just boil down to epistemic possibilities or something like that. You still got modal collapse, and you got to deal with that. But we would just be confined to the way we epistemically divide modality at the joints.
What is a necessitarian?
Necessitarian is someone who thinks that there's everything is necessary, right? There's no contingency.
Yeah. This is the only possible world. The one we're in.
So they think that you commonly take things to be true about how things could have been, right? Like if you had coffee this morning, you'll probably take it to be true that you could have had tea instead, right? And the necessitarian's going to say that the only sense in which it's true that you could have had tea is that, and then they'll cash it out in some version of an epistemic guise, right? So that it's like it's compatible with all the things you know. There's no contradiction or something in you supposing that you had tea, but that doesn't mean that it's actually possible. Strictly speaking, it couldn't have gone any differently to how it did go, right? Whereas the person who's against a necessitarian, the kind of possibilist or whatever the opposite is going to say that there really are facts that are true, independently of whether in addition to that story about that epistemic, like the way that I can imagine things being different, they say that there's something else that really could be different in some kind of strong.
There's a slight issue with that in the sense that you've got to kind of in some way know the reality of everything to demonstrate that what you're saying is necessarily true in that sense, though, because I mean a lot of the time when we're talking about like physics and biology, we're just kind of, like you said, we're just using it as a descriptive for the phenomenon we observe, and obviously there's overlaps and based on how the theories kind of interact with each other, but I mean everyone kind of assumes that at some level that's all going to kind of like mold into one theory in principle. But if you're going to say that this, it is the case that there are true facts and this is one of those, you'd kind of had to justify pretty much everything that there is to know in order to demonstrate that as absolutely true. And otherwise you're just basically back to square one, where you're just kind of making these kind of abstracts. Well, I could have had coffee this morning instead of tea, but I don't really know enough about the laws of physics and how causality works to really say for sure that there is only one possible answer, in that I must have had a coffee and not tea, if that makes sense.
I was going to say that must really strangely involve causality.
Well, I mean, like you could discover a law of physics tomorrow, but that's somehow acausal, that allows you to either go back and have tea instead of coffee in some weird way, or not necessarily in the macroscopic sense, but in maybe the quantum sense, you could do something similar, and then you've suddenly got a problem where this kind of like simplistic classical world that you've been living in isn't quite as convenient as you thought it was, and there might be cases where you could have, in theory, have tea instead of coffee. But
if modal collapse is true, though, the laws of nature would be necessary, right?
Yeah, if a necessitarian's position is correct, then not only are all of the necessary, like the having of coffee instead of tea, but also the laws which say that you can only have coffee instead of tea, those laws couldn't have been different either. They have to be the way they are too. Absolutely everything.
It wouldn't even be counterfactuals. They would be counterpossibles.
Go ahead, Ashley. Keep going.
Well, I mean, the necessitarian can still talk about counterfactuals, right? They just,
in a sense, yeah.
By saying that it's an epistemic story. It's a bit
That's
like
true.
the way that a fictionalist can talk about some type of discourse, like
right, that's a good point.
numbers or something, and just say, well, I'm just saying according to the story of Platonism, blah blah blah, right? It's so that necessitarian needn't actually stop himself talking about the fact that he could have had tea instead of coffee. He just takes it to be a claim, an epistemic claim, not a metaphysical claim.
So does this contradict free will?
A necessitarian, yes, for sure, says there's
they're incompatibilists. Yep.
So is it like a form of determinism?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like the most strong form of determinism.
Yeah, I feel like I just dragged it.
And the necessitarians would disagree. So a necessitarian's modus ponens would be a libertarian's modus tollens. Because they're both incompatibilists.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, that's right.
If we just, unless people want to talk about that more, I just was curious to Malpass. What do you think about the idea of superpositions and like causal quantum randomness?
You might have to be a bit more specific about what you're asking. I mean,
right. So as far as I've scratched on the very surface level, the idea of a superposition is that something can be something and not something at the same time. Almost like they coexist.
Like with the Copenhagen
It's
interpretation.
holographic.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to give a very faithful idea of what superposition is without just looking at the mathematics of it. But
right. So I asked, kind of presuming that you'd already spent some time pondering it, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, so can you imagine a graph, right, with an x and a y-axis, right? And if you imagine, do you know what a vector is?
Yep.
Yeah,
so, I believe so.
Well, a vector is just something that's expressed by two numbers, basically, an x number and a y number. Basically, we can just think about it like this. So, if I said, if my vector was 0 and 1, then it would just be no points up, right, and 1 point across, right? And if it was 1 and 0, it would be 1 point up and no points across, right? And if it was 1 and 1, then it would be 1 point up and 1 point across. So it would be like an arrow pointing 45 degrees. Do you get me?
Yep.
Right. So in quantum mechanics, the way that it's cashed out in Hilbert space is that the state that a system can be in is expressed as a vector, and if the vector is aligned with one of the axes, as in if the vector is effectively something like 0 and 1, then that's the system being in a determinate state, right? Like being the cat being alive, right? And if it's 0, 1, the cat's alive, and if it's 1, 0, the cat's dead. But if it's a mixed state, right? If if the vector is both 1 and 1 or 2 and 1 or something like that, any other state other than, like if one of the values of the vector is not 0, then the arrow isn't aligned with either axis perfectly, but it's pointing somewhere else in the area.
You
And
see
that's
why
what
I'm
it-
confused? It's I don't so I'm confused because if they so we have a cat and the claim is the cat is alive or the cat is dead. It sounds like it is pointing towards the excluded middle if it's pointing not on either of those axes.
Well, but I mean, it's not so crazy in the vector space because you've obviously got a whole area that you can have an arrow pointing in other than directly up or directly along. It could be pointing at any of the intermediate angles in between those. And the point is just that in quantum mechanics, it allows you to have states that are in the area in between those two extremes. And it's quite another thing to say, well, yeah, but what does that mean in terms of cats, right? And Schrodinger's point with Schrodinger's cat, it's supposed to be a kind of reductio about how this idea couldn't possibly be true of reality, right? Is that it doesn't make sense if you think about it as for macroscopic objects like cats. But so I'm saying that superposition is a mathematical idea, essentially. It means it's about Hilbert spaces and vectors and how you express them in that language. It makes sense. And no one knows how that's supposed to translate into the real world. It's not clear that it means that something has and lacks a property. I don't think it's fair to say of the vector that it lacks the property of the x-axis. I mean, it just has it to a degree. Right, so we don't know what it means for a cat to have existence to a degree, right? That doesn't really seem to be something we understand, but that's what quantum mechanics is telling you that superpositions are. It's something, it's better to think of it as in a mixed state, right? It's not, I don't know.
Yeah, it's almost gonna. I think it might be just too hard to explain to me. But it does seem like. Go ahead.
It's fucking hard. It's just too hard to understand.
Right, I'd have to get like a base
wave function of probabilities. The only way to describe it is mathematically. And then once you try to do it like a one-to-one correspondence between the mathematical language and physical reality, you get Schrodinger's reductio.
There's a good by a philosopher of physics called David Z. Albert, and I think it's called like an introduction to quantum mechanics or something, or the philosophy of quantum mechanics or something. But that's a really good, reasonably readable, but also quite detailed introduction.
So if I was to claim that the law of excluded middle only applies to the macro, would you say I'm miles off?
I don't think that there's much enthusiasm amongst people who formalize quantum mechanics in saying, I mean, there used to be a bunch of people who said that there was a quantum logic, so classical logic applied to the macro world and quantum logic applied to the quantum world. And they thought that there were differences between classical logic and quantum logic, but the difference wasn't that quantum logic didn't have the law of excluded middle. It was a more subtle deviation, and it's not I mean, you can explore the idea, but it's not one that people who look at quantum logic endorse. They don't think it's a straightforward violation of excluded middle or non-contradiction. They normally have a less easy to understand idea of what the difference is between classical logic and quantum logic.
Actually, that's the biggest misunderstanding, is that it's not a violation of the law of the law of non-contradiction. It's actually a conjunction of two states. That's what's being represented. It's It's not one state being in two positions. It's a conjunction of two
Right.
states.
That's very confusing, though. How do you
Wait.
get from- okay, go ahead.
As one observable, right? Because that's all I wanted to say.
But
It's
it's
just-
not quite the conjunction of two states. It's a mixed state, and because the
Well,
idea
it's represented as a conjunction of two states, or as that mixture. And the question is whether or not the wave function is epistemic or actually metaphysical, because the Copenhagen interpretation holds that the wave function is just an epistemic device we use.
I thought it was the other way around.
No. So like the pilot wave theory, that's actually
Yes, that's
metaphysical.
Palm.
The wave function itself is actually a metaphysical reality because it's a wave and a particle. It's being that wave's guiding the particle. But under the Copenhagen interpretation, it's an epistemic device. The mathematics is just outlining the limitations of our understanding, like our measuring abilities of these quantum systems.
See, I thought it was a physical interpretation, Copenhagen.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a physical interpretation.
I think that's a misunderstanding of the Copenhagen interpretation. I know that's what
Well,
people.
you sound like you're describing as the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which is epistemic, but I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I got to look it up again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and the whole idea about the Copenhagen interpretation is that it's, I mean, to be really honest, it's agnostic about whether or not there is a definite particle or not. But the whole idea is that we're just modeling this particle from our epistemic limitations.
Yeah, everything I've read about Copenhagen is that non-locality is like an inherent feature of reality.
Mm-hmm.
And then an implication from that is that it is metaphysical. It's not just purely epistemic. But like I said, I don't want to directly contradict you. I have to go back.
Well,
and read
that's
the literature.
no, I know,
That's
but Bell's inequality is one of the nails in the coffin of the Copenhagen interpretation. That's the interesting thing that most people also
Why
don't.
is that? I got to go back and read it. Bell's inequalities, I thought, implied that reality was for sure non-local on the quantum level.
Yeah.
I know, and that's the problem with the Copenhagen interpretation.
The inequalities, if anything, are the final nail in the coffin of the pilot wave theory.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yes, that's
No,
correct.
not necessarily. No, not at all. Actually, with the pilot wave
You could be
theories,
right. Honestly, I forget.
they're inherently non-local. Actually, pilot wave theories are inherently non-local.
See, I thought Bohm was trying to reintroduce like locality back into the quantum world. That's why Craig like motivates Bohm's theory to preserve the first premise of the Kalam. But like I said, I got to go back and read this stuff. I'm not going to say anything dogmatically, honestly. Stuff's hard enough.
Yeah, that's just my understanding. I mean, I could be wrong.
I mean, so in the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen issue with Hagen, right, is that what's going on in an entangled pair of particles where one of them gets measured, right, and then the other one instantaneously reacts or whatever. So if you measure, if they're entangled in spin or whatever, and you measure that one of them is spin up, then the other one stops being in a superposition of spin and becomes spin down as a result, even if it's really far away, and that's non-local. And that's what Einstein was objecting to. And the Bell inequalities show you that there's no hidden variables theory that can explain what's going on in that.
No non-local hidden variables theory. People always forget that part about Bell's inequality.
The Bell's inequality is saying that there's no local hidden variables theory that can explain that inequality.
And I agree with that. That is completely true.
Yeah, but that's to validate that's to repudiate what Einstein was arguing for there, which seems to be to confirm. I mean, because
I agree. Quantum mechanics.
Right? So
I agree. Quantum mechanics is inherently non-local. It's just that Bell, like I said, a lot of people seem to think that Bell's inequality is arguing against all hidden variable theories, that's not the case. It's only for,
The
so it only
Copenhagen
local.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, so it wouldn't argue against like Bohmian hidden variables.
Yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, because they're inherently non-local.
But how does it argue against the Copenhagen? You said it was the final nail in the coffin for the Copenhagen theory.
That's what I can't see. Yeah, it seems compatible with the Copenhagen.
Drunk
Yeah.
and stupid is
It's
not
not
the way
really.
to go through life, so.
I mean, the reason why pilot theory isn't accepted is because there's not enough evidence to really justify it at the moment. And there's some, but it's just not experimentally borne out enough to be reliably say, look,
really
this is-
theoretical. You're right.
So, like, yeah, I mean, there's like ways you can kind of frame the argument to say, look, from an a priori position, like the pilot wave theory explains it better. But it's like the problem is, it's like, well, we've got all these other theories that the Copenhagen explains a lot better for lots of everyday stuff, and we can't just throw that out at the same time because that contradicts what we're trying to explain with the pilot wave theory. So that most people just stick with Copenhagen and say, well, look, the pilot wave has some merit to it, but there's not enough to say that's the way we should go at the moment.
Okay, I'm going to bed now anyway, it's too late.
Yeah, thank you for
Just really
coming.
quick, one last question, Alex.
A quick
What
one.
do you think about chair realism?
About what?
Chair realism?
Like the
No, no,
rejection of Van den Wagen.
Like there's a essential
There's
quality.
only chairs
to what a
arranged
chair is.
atom-wise, or atoms arranged chair-wise.
I don't know.
Do chairs exist? Do chairs exist?
I don't know. Beds exist, and I'm going to go and lie down on one. I feel
Good night.
You presuppose a bed exists, huh? You left.